is and what skills are necessary for a successful mediation to occur, let's now look at the mediation process and what's involved with the step-by-step of completing a successful mediation. First, let's look at the keys to a good mediation. The first is to reduce the tensions between the disputants. Before you get anywhere else, you want to try and really get people to back down from the anger and the emotional frustration that they're dealing with. You need to gain trust and commitment. So the disputants need to trust you in confidentiality and in multi-partiality, and you need to have their commitment to proceeding with the mediation. One technique is to move from the you and me phrasing to us and we orientation. So as you're doing that, you're changing the language structure to be more inclusive, to be more of a teamwork-oriented approach rather than here's what you need to do and here's what I need to do. Instead, you're going to say, here's what we're going to do together. You want to make sure that you don't rush a mediation. These take time, they're challenging, there's a lot of details that go on within them, and rushing it is not going to be an advantage for anybody involved. Finally, remember that every mediation is different. There's a different technique, a different strategy for every case. So let's look at how mediations are initiated. What's the process of getting one started? Usually the disputing parties are the ones seeking a mediation. They are usually unilaterally or bilaterally seeking assistance through a mediation agency. So what happens then is if it's unilateral, if one person says, I want to get a mediation, the other party must agree. No one can be dragged kicking and screaming into a mediation. They must assent to participation. In some cases, disputants will be referred to mediation, and this might be a context in which members of an organization might be told to participate in a mediation, or even perhaps a couple who's seeking a divorce might be referred by a lawyer or someone else. So what happens at that point then is that assessments are made about whether mediation is appropriate for the context and if other dispute management options are necessary as well. If mediation is suitable, a mediator is then matched to the disputants. And there's multiple stages of mediation, and we'll go through these one at a time, but I wanted you to get the overall view before we jump into that. So the 5 stages are to start with introductions, get people to tell their stories, identify the issues at hand, generate some options, and then come up with an agreement. Sounds simple, right? Stage 1 is introductions. And this is where you overview procedures and explain your role as a mediator. You would begin the session on a positive note and gain the trust of the parties. Like, for example, you might say, congratulations on your willingness to come, and thank you for your openness to discuss and resolve this issue. You would establish your position as the mediator as a neutral and multi-partial third party, emphasizing that the disputants are part of the decision-making process and that the solutions will be their own. The mediator would create a safe and open environment for effective communication to occur. The mediator would also finally establish ground rules. And this would be something like each party is expected to listen carefully, no one interrupts anybody, you would make sure that the parties agree to the guidelines before proceeding, and the ground rules would absolutely depend on the context and your personal style of mediation if you were running the show. The second stage involves telling the story. Each party, one at a time, tells their perspective regarding the issue. This allows the mediator to hear all sides and open lines of competent communication. Mediators can probe for more information by checking accuracy, asking questions, and what they may find are differences in the stories. And differences in stories must be noted by the mediator, as they could really be key areas of misunderstanding. Emotions may be vented at this stage, but intense displays of emotion should be minimized. And this is where the mediator's approach may vary. But you can imagine that if someone is going through an extreme display of anger or sorrow, that would make the conversation much less productive. So again, with the principle of negative reciprocity, you want to make sure that the disputant who is showing an emotion display isn't putting too much out into the forum. It's appropriate to show some emotion, but you want to maybe take a break, have someone calm down before you proceed. This stage should also help disputants recognize their goals. Mediators need to be sure that disputants are knowledgeable about their goals and to see if one person's goals are blocking the others. And there are various kinds of goals that we should think about. One is instrumental, which is very functional, self-presentational. So some people may come into a mediation really wanting to look good in the process. This may be in an organizational context, for instance. Other goals can be relational, and other goals can be about the process. The approach to handling conflict and how disputants communicate about conflict can really differ quite a bit. The mediator must ensure at this point that once this stage is nearing its end, parties are talking about the same issue. So through the process of telling the story, you want to make sure that you've gotten on the same page. Sometimes you can find that there's misunderstandings and one person is dealing with one issue and another person thinks they're dealing with another. So the mediator becomes a translator, in a sense, in this stage. The next stage involves identifying the issues at hand. The mediator attempts to discover each party's interests and positions from the identified issues, and they must come to a point of agreement on the issues. So you would say, here are the 3 things that we're going to address and resolve, and both disputants, or all disputants, there can be more than 2, must agree that those are the 3 things that they're going to address. Otherwise, the process in this stage must continue. You cannot move on from this stage until you've identified specifically which issues are going to be points of resolution. And once you have those issues identified, you would move into stage 4, which is generating options for resolution. And this is where a lot of creativity has to come in, both on the part of the mediator as well as the part of the disputants. So disputants will begin to generate solutions and then to evaluate them one by one. Again, trying to maintain as calm a demeanor and attitude as possible, trying to really do some perspective taking and see what might work for both parties, not just for them. Mediators need to ensure that the solutions proposed meet the disputant's criteria. So they might have said at the beginning of the mediation, here's what I need, here are the 5 things that have to happen for this to work for our organization or for our marriage or for our kids. And sometimes in the middle of something, it might be easy to lose track of that criteria as a disputant. So the mediator has to make sure that they're tracking that and saying, okay, well, that solution meets 3 of 5 of your criteria. Is that good enough? And the disputant might say, no, you know what, I really do need those other 2 things. Mediators also in here must make their best judgment regarding solutions. So this might be something where they can actually weigh in an opinion and say, you know, that solution doesn't really sound like a very good option. It sounds like it might be oppressive to one party and overly favoring another. So they can absolutely offer judgment in that regard. But once satisfying options have been generated, the final stage is to write the agreement. So this is written out in legal terminology. The agreement is written in clear but also simple language and contains a what-if clause that specifies what happens should one disputant violate the agreement. The agreement should be positively toned. It should not place blame. It should be balanced, meaning it represents both sides equally. All parties should sign the agreement once it's been reviewed and acceptable. And the written agreement is the only thing that is then saved from the mediation process. So those are the basics of mediation. And again, every mediation would look different in the specifics, but in general, they would follow through with this stage. Our next lecture is going to look at this in a particular context, and that's divorce mediation.